I'm delighted to welcome back Lieutenant General Ben Hodges to the channel. Ben is a retired United States Army officer who became commander of the United States Army Europe in November 2014 and held that position for 3 years until retiring from the United States Army in January 2018. Until recently, he was the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, specializing in NATO, transatlantic relationship, and international security. I'm sure you will get a lot of value out of this video. When you get to the end of it, please do add a like and check that you are subscribed so you don't miss any more of the incredible speakers who give up their time to share their experience and insights on the channel. Please also, at the end of the interview, you'll find a short trailer for a documentary film that is being made by friends and colleagues of mine that seek to show Ukrainian resilience in action and how people in Europe who are committed to freedom can actually support that resilience by running aid convoys into Ukraine to help both frontline troops and frontline civilian towns. I'm sure you will find this project fascinating, and the desire, of course, is to make sure that this film can be shown on the channel for free forever and have a significant impact on support for Ukraine at this time. And I wanted to also thank everybody in the community who has generously supported this channel and the creation of content, the intense effort over the last 3 years almost to fight Russian propaganda. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. And of course, everyone who has been generous enough to support the validated Ukrainian charities that appear in the description of the video. So, Ben, I'm absolutely delighted you could join us again on the channel. I know when people see these episodes come up, they go fairly crazy for the kind of content and the high value information and insight you can provide. Let's dive straight into a whole range of, how I should describe, existential problems. We've got the referendum in the EU on whether to, in Moldova, rather, on whether to join the EU. That was extremely close call, but it didn't go Moscow's favor. We have Georgia on the brink, potentially falling back into a one-party state, essentially a Russian puppet state. And of course, we have already evidence emerging of heavy interference in the US elections. How threatening are these times from a, let's say, a pure electoral point of view?
Well, I think that anybody that's confused or wondering whether or not Russia seeks to upend the democratic aspirations of Eastern European countries or of Americans should pay attention. That this is part of what is at stake. It's an assault on all of us who care about our the freedoms that we have, the ability to make the decisions that we make to live up to our potential. I mean, that just sounds kind of idealistic, but that's actually what is being attacked. And when you see what Russia is doing to cause Americans to lose confidence in their own electoral processes, to plant the seeds of doubt, and to pour so much money into it, and it's uh, undeniable. I mean, the Department of Justice recently has released information showing who was receiving influencers who were receiving money from Russia. And then, of course, we have recent, uh, how do you say, Elon Musk talks about his frequent conversations with Vladimir Putin. This is, and Trump has bragged that he's had recent conversations with Vladimir Putin. I mean, number one, this is illegal, but it also shows how penetrated we are in American society.
And that was going to be my next question. Obviously, Musk is a confidant of sorts with Putin. Putin, as a KGB officer, a former KGB officer, is very good at psychological manipulation, especially on those who perhaps may be a little more politically naive. But what we've seen and some of the things that Musk says is that he's not necessarily a paid asset because he's already incredibly a rich person. He may or may not be getting economic benefits. But what I wanted to focus on here is actually the myth, the historical myths, the lies, the distortions he may well be getting them from the horse's mouth. And these clearly are injected into the informational community, and especially, I would say, the more sort of, right wing evangelical, if you want to put a label on that. How tricky is this, given that quite possibly he may have security clearances in relation to SpaceX? He certainly has critical government contracts. Is it going too far now to say that Musk is a national security risk?
I think he absolutely is. The problem, though, is we have become dependent on part of what he provides, real important technical capabilities for communications, space travel, satellites, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a danger whenever somebody, an independent person like that, has so much leverage over things and capabilities that we need. Now, look, we have always depended on the private sector for capabilities, for communications, for uh, shipping, both air and maritime shipping. Those are not military aircraft or U.S. Navy ships that we use. These are all commercial. So it's not new that we depend on the commercial sector for a lot. But when it's something that is so specific, like satellite communications or space travel, then it starts becoming a problem. And when a person has so much wealth, is independently wealthy, that they can't be bought in the literal sense of the word, but yet they can wield influence in a way that suits whatever their political or ego um, ideas, egotistical ideas. I'm sorry, I'm struggling looking for the right words here. Because it's such an unusual thing. We've always had rich, extremely wealthy people. You've always had oligarchs in different countries. That's not new. Somebody at this scale that is willing to put their finger on the scale, for example, with Ukraine. I I don't know that I've seen that before.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because Russian propaganda works as an echo chamber. It doesn't require everyone to be assets and everyone to be agents. But you'll have someone like, let's say, Joe Rogan, who I think is an extremely effective communicator and interviewer, but he is getting some of his narratives from Musk and that community. He may well feel that these are organic and genuine, and he may not have malign intent, but he hasn't platformed any Ukrainian voices on his channel. So this ripples out into the wider community to people
Well,
that don't have malign intent necessarily.
no, that's an excellent point. And the part of this that about which I have been incredulous because it's so hard to understand that how the Republican Party that has, I mean, the party of Reagan and over the decades and John McCain, these people, Mitt Romney, how they now echo Kremlin talking points. Tucker Carlson, who has a significant audience, um, has, been quite a shill for the Kremlin, talking about how wonderful things are in Moscow. I mean, it was almost cartoonish what he did, but yet he has an audience that laps that up. And then you saw the Senator J.D. Vance, who is the vice presidential candidate, along with the former President Trump, talked about basically that the United States has no interest in Ukraine, that this is, we shouldn't be taking sides. And I'm like, how in the hell does a sitting U.S. senator talk about, these kinds of things? But it's not just inside the U.S. You saw the UN Secretary General this past week in Kazan at the BRICs summit, the same guy who has condemned Israel, who turned down an invitation to come to Ukraine's peace summit, shows up at the BRICS summit, physically hugging Lukashenko, a known murderer, legitimizing Vladimir Putin, convicted by the International Criminal Court. Um, it, to me, the legitimacy of the United Nations has taken severe beating here just by where Secretary General Guterres chooses to go.
And we probably won't get too deep into that subject, but the co-option, corruption, and dare I say, manipulation and perversion of international institutions is a key part of Putin's long-term strategy. They haven't got to the ICC, but they clearly have wormed their way into the UN. There are various sporting bodies that are absolutely corrupted with Russian money and influence and are keen to let them back into the world stage and legitimize them. And there are leading international charities. One only has to mention the Red Cross. And of course, Ukrainians have a fit because of the lack of action of that organization on the ground. But there are many, many other examples there. This is a point of inflection, isn't it? Because there's a good chance Trump gets in. It's a non-zero chance of him getting in. In fact, there's a stronger and stronger likelihood unless who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of days. But certainly we could be dealing with this situation. Our next conversation, we could well be talking about how to mitigate the worst of his policy decisions. In that respect, of course, people have to fight for him not to win. But I guess, are you preparing for a world where we're having these conversations under very different circumstances, where Trump is in office, where there is potentially paralysis and stagnation in the Pentagon, where the de-Trumping, de-risking of NATO hasn't quite worked? What are you doing to think and plan around these eventualities?
Well, of course, we would be foolish not to anticipate that very strong possibility that Mr. Trump could be reelected. And I can't claim to be a believer in democracy and then reject if the majority of my country or in a majority if the United States elects Donald Trump, then he is the president. I'm not the kind that would say, "Not my president, I'm leaving." That I don't think that's obviously the right thing to do. Um, but I immediately will begin work on the next election cycle to try and support candidates who would live up to the expectations that I have, as I have done here over the past few months. But also, I think being practical. Our strategic interests remain our strategic interests, and so I will look for ways to try and protect those strategic interests, maintain relationships with our allies, um, and continue to compete in the information space, if you will, to find ways to counter the malign influences of fascist or anti-democratic forces.
I went back and looked at our initial conversation, which is now more than 2 years old, and it seems some of the things we talked about there are not just relevant, but have become starkly clearer that this is the case. One, that Putin, his main strategy is escalation and nuclear threat. Um, but we have seen the West cede escalation dominance to him, and we've seen that he has really no ceiling on, apart from the actual use of nuclear weapons, of where that escalation could go. And with the arrival of North Korean troops, everyone's focusing on, 10,000 who may or may not be at the front. Um, Russian contacts of mine say, well, what's the point of that? Whereas 10,000 a month may make a difference, and that may be where we're heading. We don't know the quid pro quo there, but you have Russia on a sort of escalatory path because it believes it can outlast the West no matter what. And we have the West, which is on a de-escalatory path at every step. No matter what we've given Ukraine, the calculus is always whether that is going to contribute to this so-called escalation or not. This is not going to change, is it? I mean, to an extent, there is not a huge difference in that respect between Trump and Harris. Neither are going to break this dynamic and change the strategy to being one that seeks to uh, gain regain the power of escalation and unpredictability and all these kind of things.
Until we start understanding, accepting, and acting like the Russians are at war with us, then this is only going to continue. And the way you described it, Jonathan, is so good. They are so compelling that we are on a de-escalatory path, while our opponents, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, are on an escalatory path, a trajectory, which they will continue until they are stopped. Now, this doesn't mean that there has to be shooting, a kinetic conflict, but internally, our Department of Justice, I think, has not acted with the urgency and the decisiveness to root out people who are being paid by external sources to influence what goes on inside the United States. I think there's a much more uh, there's a need for a much more aggressive Department of Justice as part of countering the influence. We should not be naive about the quid pro quo that North Korea and Iran are getting from Russia and China. What they will get if Iran and North Korea, which already have ballistic missiles, if they get the navigation uh, capabilities that Russia and China have in their ballistic missiles, this will significantly increase the threat to Israel and to South Korea and Japan. So I think the technology transfer, the money, et cetera, what's going back and forth between these four is significant. Iran would not be able to do what it's doing now if it was not getting support from Russia as well as money from Qatar. Um, so we have to we have to organize for victory. First, we have to think in terms of victory, actually winning the way we did in the Second World War. Win this competition. That means we have to use all of our tools, not just military tools, but economic tools, diplomatic tools, informational, and not be shy about building up our military capability. And so if you look at the four big challenges, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. There are others, of course, all kinds of threats that are out there, but really those are the four that I see. Um, I believe, much like when Great Britain and the United States agreed that they had to defeat Nazi Germany first before they could defeat the Empire of Japan, we have to defeat Russia first. Defeat, not help Ukraine get to a good negotiating position, defeat them. If that happens, if we the West make that our objective and give Ukraine everything that they need to defeat Russia, that leads to the isolation of Iran, which then degrades their ability to threaten Israel and other countries in the Middle East. It leads to the isolation of North Korea, which has no other friends in the world. And then the Chinese will see, wow, the West really does have the political will and industrial capacity and military capability to defend this so-called international rules-based order, sovereignty, human rights, respect for international law, respect for freedom of navigation, international institutions. We've got to lean into this. But instead, we seem to be kind of picking around it. We don't want to escalate with the Russians. We're worried about a deal with Iran, but we're also worried about these other things. And North Korea, we're not exactly sure what to do there. Um, we lack decisiveness. And I think that's kind of what I'm going on too long about. We have to organize. We have to organize for that and think strategically. And I think by connecting these, it will get us in a mindset of the right scale of industrial capacity that we need.
And that essentially requires a recognition, as you say, that we are at war. At the moment, we are still with Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is ever more coming to feel like a relative by the side of a terminally ill friend who'd rather be somewhere else. You know, we've taken Ukraine to dignitas, and we have sympathy and everything, but essentially, you know, the inevitable is coming. And there's a recent Chatham House report which talks about the four potential outcomes of the war: long war, defeat for Ukraine, frozen conflict, and victory for Ukraine. It seems to me that at the moment, for as long as it takes strategy, is inevitably leading towards the attritional and incremental loss that either will guarantee the long war, which of course we already have, or defeat for Ukraine. To actually even achieve a frozen conflict or something that could be defined as a victory requires a significant step change, not just in mindset, but in logistics, strategic logistics. Do you think that's the case? And how can we force this change of mindset?
Yeah, I agree completely. Tell me, what benefit does the West, when I say the West, I mean Europe, US, Canada, and our uh, philosophical West in the Pacific, what benefit do we get with a negotiated settlement between Ukraine and Russia, where Russia retains Crimea and the territory that they now occupy, which is basically Putin's, that's his position, is that whatever they have now, they get to keep. What benefit do any of us get? Zero. There's no benefit to us because what will happen is that Russia will just wait for us to lose interest, as we always do after 2 or 3 years, and then they will resume the conflict because they will see that we don't have the political will to actually help Ukraine win. And so, because of this, nobody is going to invest real money in the reconstruction of Ukraine. So, millions more Ukrainians are going to head west into Poland and Germany, Romania, and other parts of Europe. There's going to be continued disruption of grain and energy supplies that normally flow from Ukraine or through the Black Sea. So that's going to continue to affect our economies. So there's no upside for any of this. That's why I don't understand this willingness to just kind of throw Ukraine under the bus and say, "Come on, give up Crimea, let them have Crimea," as if it's some little patch, versus the most important part of terrain on the entire Black Sea, other than the Straits. So I think that we have got to understand the significance of why it's important to us that Ukraine wins. Now, ultimately, of course, Ukrainians have to say we can't make them continue to fight if they just can't do it anymore. But I don't think that they're anywhere close to that point. If they sense that we are prepared, not for as long as it takes, but whatever it takes, then they will continue to fight because they know what happens when the Red Army shows up at their front door.
And in relation to that, Crimea seems to be a sticking point. You've always talked about Crimea as being pivotal to any sense of victory, to any sense of defeating Putin and preventing his escalatory path. I think that certainly remains true now. But the appetite in the West to embrace that step for a number of reasons, not just the military and logistical difficulties, but also the Russian narratives that seem to have percolated through into people's heads by essentially enabling and protecting Crimea from being retaken by Ukraine. Is it not true that we are implicitly rewarding colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and even genocide? Because there's been a huge population transformation since Russia occupied it. The actual original native population of the island, the Crimean Tatars, who had started returning in the 90s, obviously following Stalin's deportations, they've been once again either forced to leave, go underground, and many have been arrested, tortured, and of course their culture is suppressed. And vast numbers of Russian colonists, people who have thieved and appropriated the land, have been introduced. Western policy is explicitly protecting those people and buying into Russian narratives. Do you share that fairly harsh assessment? And what's the prospect of us fighting for our values if we've bought into this tremendous lie?
Well, first of all, it's important that people understand the geography of the Black Sea region and why Crimea is so important. It's not just some piece of land or some province. It is the most important part of Ukraine's sovereign territory, which is why Catherine the Great annexed it back at the end of the 18th century, and it's the reason that Russia was willing to flaunt international law and annex it illegally back in 2014 because Crimea gives its owner the ability to dominate the Black Sea region with air power, sea power, missiles. If the Russians have it, they are able to continue to attack Russian or Ukrainian seaports. Uh, Crimea also blocks or controls access in and out of Azov Sea, which is not international water, it's internal water agreed between Russia and Ukraine. But as long as Russia sits in Crimea and has that big bridge there and over the Kerch Strait, Ukraine will never be able to rebuild Mariupol and Verdansk even after they liberate it. So it has economic implications. But then the other part that you address is it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's abstract, but when we talk about sovereignty, this is part of what was agreed after the end of the Second World War, the international rules-based order, respect for sovereignty of nations, respect for international agreements. Russia has been a signatory to multiple agreements where they either directly or implicitly accept Ukrainian sovereignty over Crimea. Clearly, they never live up to any agreement. So why does anybody think in a new agreement that Russia will all of a sudden become virtuous and live up to an agreement where they would not continue to violate Ukrainian sovereignty and to reward Russia's illegal actions by letting them keep what they took? What a what a signal to the Chinese that the West really lacks the willingness to protect sovereignty of, let's say, the Philippines or the international claims in the South China Sea.
Hopefully, we've got time for one more question in this short but packed episode. So you've described here that Crimea is still key to victory, but there are two other things that I think beyond victory need consideration. One is justice, restitution, and freedom for Ukraine to develop in ways that it chooses. It seems to me the only way to even get a semblance of those is to take and keep huge chunks of Russian land that could be negotiated back. Um, and the other one, of course, is security itself. And President Zelensky has put forward a victory plan, which unfortunately has not gone down particularly well, it seems. But in there, he makes a kind of a choice, quite a stark binary choice between NATO or nukes. I would argue that actually that is not enough. In the point where international institutions, Article 5, UN, all these things have become degraded to the point where they're maybe no longer effective, or where Putin believes they're no longer affected, then actually for its security long term, Ukraine will need the EU and NATO and nukes, plus turn itself into a formidable military industrial fortress. Is that going too far, or do you think we're heading towards that as the only viable concept of long-term security?
Well, first of all, I really liked what President Zelensky put forward, his victory plan. I thought it was practical, it was feasible. It only lacks American support. And if you have American support, then I think other European countries would feel more confident supporting it. The Eastern European countries, the ones that are closest to Russia, they're not confused about the threat and the importance of Ukrainian victory. It's those who are a little bit further away that are less enthusiastic, let's say, about this. Ukrainians have learned that they really can't depend on the West. They can't trust the West. We failed them to live up to our obligations embodied in the Budapest Memorandum. And they see that we are easily blackmailed by Russian threats of the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. And so I think they're going to come to the point where they say, okay, we're going to have our own nuclear weapon. If we're not in NATO, we will have to regain the capability we had that would give us more of a deterrent effect. And I think it's in our interest, number one, not only that Ukraine not, or that anybody else thinks they have to have a nuclear weapon, but that getting a strong, vibrant Ukraine into NATO, that that would significantly alter the balance of power, and would give us the most successful, competent, experienced army in all of Europe would be Ukraine. Having them in NATO would significantly increase the European pillar, if you will, within the alliance, and with less requirement then for American capability to have to be in on the ground or operating inside Europe. So, I mean, there's so many positives to having Ukraine not only win, but being a part of the alliance. Um, you mentioned the terrain that Ukraine currently occupies in the Kursk direction. I thought this was a brilliant counterstroke by Ukraine. It changed the narrative. It creates the possibility of land to trade in some sort of negotiation. It certainly creates a dilemma for the Kremlin on how long can they allow this bridgehead to stay there. How do they move resources around to deal with it? It sounds like these North Korean troops may be headed that direction. We're, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that's going to look like, um, but um, the idea that somehow Russian victory is inevitable is being proven wrong every single day. The Russians are still clawing their way towards Pokrovsk. This has been going on for 8 months, and they're not there yet, even though they have the numerical advantage. So I think the possibility or the inevitability of Russian victory is nowhere uh, doesn't exist unless we quit.
And very quick one. This is probably a yes, no, just to wrap things up. With NATO, the de-risking of NATO in a potential second Trump presidency, does the role of Supreme Military Command need to potentially be split with the European if part of the outcome of Trump winning the election could be a form of paralysis that makes NATO not an effective deterrent, let's say?
I hope we don't come to that. I think most Europeans would prefer to keep an American commander because they want to keep the Americans involved. But I also believe that Europeans understand that if we fail, if the United States fails, if a Trump administration uh, diminishes our role, our contributions inside the alliance, even though he cannot legally just unilaterally pull us out, but he can minimize what we actually do, then I think European countries understand that the risk does not decrease, only goes up, and that they will have to create or do something perhaps outside of NATO.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I know you have to dash off, but I think we covered off some tremendously important topics there. And I'm sure these will come up in, subsequent conversations and the other conversations that you have obviously day in, day out. Thank you for coming back on the channel. Thank you for everything you do. I know the audience is going to appreciate it. These videos are always a tremendous honor to do, but also I feel important subject matter which gets debated in the public sphere.
Thanks, Jonathan. I always enjoy our conversations. I appreciate the opportunity you give me to address these things.
All your engagement with the videos on this channel is massively appreciated, as well as encouraging comments and the financial support you provide. Some of you will have donated to Ukrainian charities, including the ones listed in the descriptions of these videos. I know many of you ask how you could be doing more to help Ukraine, and that includes me. Well, here is news of a project that I think could make a huge difference. It's been initiated by Silicon Curtain, and I hope will support Ukrainians on the ground and in the diaspora and create real impact to help ensure a Ukrainian victory. It's a documentary film to be made in Ukraine later this year and shown internationally, hopefully at film festivals and on Silicon Curtain as well. We aim in the film to follow the 75th aid convoy to Ukraine by a remarkable team based in Poland, delivering vital medical, humanitarian, and military aid that helps Ukrainians remain resilient. No doubt the efforts of this team has saved innumerable lives of Ukrainian servicemen and women fighting on the front line of freedom. We have a unique opportunity to share authentic stories on the world stage through this film via film festivals, social media, and streaming to Silicon Curtain. The film will provide a counterweight to Russian propaganda films such as Russians at War. It will show spontaneous stories gathered on the journey as we travel the length of the front line. Filming footage and interviews along the journey, we will have a unique opportunity to convey the shared humanity and common cause of Ukrainians living with war. The film will focus on stories of hope and resilience with the war as a backdrop and aims to create a compelling narrative and tone that is entirely authentic. Well, here's the important bit. We're aiming to raise £12,000 to record the dog sled tournament and create a stunning trailer for the project. Overall, the project will cost up to $100,000 for end-to-end production and distribution. For the price of a DVD rental or a streamed movie, you could help create a film that raises awareness of Ukraine's struggle and generates funds for further aid convoys. Supporters of the film will get early access to see it and free access to the film for all time. This is a bold and ambitious project, but it will be led by an experienced documentary team with a professional cinematographer. It is time, I think, to join together to achieve something powerful and unique for Ukraine. After reviewing many project ideas, we feel that this is the best way that we can have an impact. Tentatively titled To the Edge of Freedom, here is a short description of the film. A world champion dog sled racer navigates dangerous obstacles through the apocalypse-like battle zones of Ukraine's front line, delivering life-saving aid to ordinary heroes engaged in extraordinary acts of valor. Igor Traks, the team leader, is a remarkable personality and relentless supporter of Ukraine throughout the full-scale war. The film starts in Finland at the World Championship Dog Sled Tournament with Igor. Fresh from his 11th World Championship in dog sled racing, Igor Trans leads his foundation's 75th humanitarian mission to the front lines of war-torn Ukraine. For this mission, Igor's team is joined by a few friends from the US and UK who will not only provide hands-on support, but share what they learn on the ground with news sources in the West. Our cameras follow Igor from Finland to Gdansk, to Lviv, to Mykolaiv, Kherson, to Dnipro, Pokrovsk, Kharkiv, and other frontline cities facing the brunt of Russian aggression. Along the way, they will meet colourful and determined individuals fighting for their families' right to survive. Igor and his team navigate life and death situations to bring much-needed supplies, visiting bunkers, hospitals, and units whose success may not merely determine the fate of this ancient culture, but of the West itself. The film will follow Igor's latest aid convoy to the front line and back again. I hope this description will inspire you to become part of the film project and make a difference to the war's outcome, a war that Ukraine must win clearly and decisively. Please do find the donation link in the description of the video and do reach out to me if you have any questions at all about the project and its intended impact.